Are the Dallas Cowboys up to something? NFL insider Pretty Rickey, Slick Rick Scoops, whatever you want to call him, dropped a bomb on social media earlier this morning saying the Cowboys and the 49ers, but we don't care about them, are expected to add a defensive lineman before Tuesday's NFL trade deadline. This would be a notable move for the Cowboys. We assume it's not some lower-level defensive lineman. We're going to break down who that could end up being for the Dallas Cowboys, both at defensive tackle and at defensive end, since Rickey didn't specify which one it was. Before we dive into that, this is exactly why you guys are subscribed. Free Cowboys videos each and every single day. So if you haven't already, hit that sub button so you don't miss out. Now, of note, Rickey has already said there will be a no Maxx Crosby trade. So we can cross him off the list because in addition to Rickey saying that, so has everybody else. And don't give me the, oh, well, Micah, Jerry, so we're going to trade Micah. Yeah, let me know when Maxx requests a trade. And if that happens, completely different conversation. So let's look at some possible targets. We'll kind of group these into different buckets here. I also did not include Myles Garrett in this conversation because I'm at least trying to keep it somewhat realistic with some of the names who have been mentioned out there. 3 different tiers. Tier 1 is your blockbuster additions, the big, splashy move, the Cowboys adding an elite-level impact player. Not sure how available those guys actually are. Tier 2 is some of your top realistic options. Some are a couple stretch options in there. And then Tier 3 is your bargain hunting options of guys that I do think are available. Probably won't be very expensive, but how much do they move the needle for you truly in the end? Before we dive into that, do you buy the report from the People's Insider? Y for yes, N for no? Let me know in the comments section of today's show. First up is Trey Hendrickson, the Bengals pass rusher. There are issues with this. Now, for starters, we know, at least by now, with all the different reports out there, the Cowboys have called on Hendrickson. And the Bengals have been telling everybody, no, they're not going to trade him. I do think it's at least fair to point out what happens if they lose again to the Chicago Bears, although there's a chance they're still just a game and a half back in the AFC North and it's not over yet. In the end, I still don't think we should get our hopes up for Trey Hendrickson. Paul Danner, who does a lot of good work for the Bengals, probably their top beat writer, had a really good insider piece on it of just like, here are all the reasons they're just not going to, even if you can lay out a pretty good expectation. Everyone has their price, though. And I do think that comes into play for several of these next players. Maybe not so much on Jeffery Simmons. Tennessee has made it pretty clear they'll listen on anybody outside of a handful of guys. I do think, by the way, T'Vondre Sweat is in that category. He hasn't been specifically mentioned as not in the category, but he was a second-round pick, so I wouldn't get my hopes up there. Jeffery Simmons is in that category. I think Peter Skoronski is in that category. Everybody else, though, I think is available. I'm not going to get my hopes up for a really good defensive lineman who I know would be down to play for the Cowboys, but I think all of these guys are 1+s, and I still have questions if the Cowboys actually trade away one of their ones. So name a player who you want to trade for. Let me know in the comment section of today's show. Let's go to Quinnen Williams. He's up here on the blockbuster trade idea list here. And there has been reporting from Jordan Schultz, Jeremy Fowler, and others that the Jets are listening on Quinnen Williams trades. For every year, there's at least one of these teams that kind of falls into this bucket of, in general, teams always listen, actually. But the reporting has also been, yeah, they'll listen, but they have to be blown away to do anything. Here's what Jeremy Fowler of ESPN reported. Many teams are calling on Quinnen Williams. The Jets are not entertaining deals for him unless it's a massive every player has a price type of trade package. Rival teams know the Jets are open to being active over the next week, but aren't yet beholden to that plan. After this, they did trade away Michael Carter, by the way. To me, this comes off of we'll listen for a top 5-3 technique in the NFL, but it's going to be a first and more to make that deal happen. The Cowboys had interest. They were one of the teams that they called on about the Micah Parsons trade. I think they were asking for like a 1 in Quinnen, and the Jets were like, we're not doing that, which they were right to not do because they're terrible this year. I think it'd be a first and more to get Quinnen. I have doubts that the Cowboys or anyone else would actually pay that. Kayvon Thibodeaux is next up here. We mentioned him on a recent video on the channel here as well. I think this falls into a very similar bucket of the Quinnen Williams trade of like, they'll listen, but because of the team control that all of these teams have outside of the Hendrickson front, you're talking probably going to be asking for a first-round pick, maybe more, even though the production doesn't merit a first-round pick or maybe a second-round pick. I wouldn't be opposed to moving that second-round pick, by the way. I think that second-round pick in general, with how bad you've drafted at that spot over the years, maybe could be a viable plan for the Cowboys. We'll get to the more realistic names here in just a second, but today's show is made possible by Bubs Naturals. Get 20% off Bubs Naturals by using code CHAT at checkout. I am an old man now. I've got 2 kids. The knees don't feel the same way they used to. The back gets a little bit tight sometimes. Bubs Naturals collagen peptides are helping out. They restore collagen levels closer to what your body naturally had in its youth, so your joints feel stronger, your hair and nails grow healthier, and your skin looks smoother. That's why, after all, my barber charges me double. Bubs Naturals is a tribute to former Navy SEAL Glenn Bub Daughtery, a national hero who laid down his life saving Americans in Benghazi. Live better for a limited time only. You guys can get 20% off Bubs Naturals by using code CHAT at checkout. Just head to bubsnaturals.com and use code CHAT at checkout, and you are all set. After you purchase, they will ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show. Tell them our show sent you here at the Cowboys Report. One more time for you. It's code CHAT over at bubsnaturals.com. And to make your life easier, link and the promo code are in the comment section and the description of today's show. Let's get to some of these are stretch, but I think these are somewhat realistic options here as well. I think are available at the right price, and that right price might end up fitting for the Cowboys. First up is Jermaine Johnson. Now, there have been reports that and really Jermaine Johnson said it too, the Jets told him they were not going to trade him. They're going to keep him. He's under contract this year and next year as part of the fifth-year option. The sack numbers don't look great. I know because he's missed time. He was looking really good in 2023. He does have some good run-stopping value. The injury in 2024, I think, kind of like put him behind a little bit on the development, on the recovery. The Athletic, by the way, listed his trade value for the Jets side, which I think is worth mentioning. Second-round pick, maybe a little bit more. Concerns me. They listed a second-round pick as the trade value for Will McDonald IV. And this one does pique my interest, maybe even more so than Jermaine Johnson, because he's under team control for longer. He's cheaper for longer as well. The pressure rate doesn't look great. Coming up, missed a couple games with an injury, but has been better as of late. McDonald is not a good run defender, but he does get pressures. And he does get sacks. He was really good, by the way, before his injury, 2024, and did slow to get going here this year. I would be intrigued by both of these guys, even though they are not the same level of player as some of the other edges that we have mentioned. So pick a Jets defensive end. JJ for Jermaine Johnson, WM for Will McDonald. Let me know in the comment section of today's show. To the other two names that we have talked a lot about here, because I bet one of these Dolphins players ends up getting traded. Jaelan Phillips is first up here. And this is the one that I think is most available in the market because he is an expiring contract, which I would be curious how the Cowboys play this one out and what the asking price is. Because in theory, the Dolphins could get like a third-round pick, maybe a fourth-round pick for Jaelan Phillips in a potential trade. What does that value end up looking like? The sack numbers aren't there. Pressure rate's really good, higher than all these guys we've discussed, which I think is an indication of, for a guy that had shown a lot of promise before he got hurt, injury, red flags there too. I would not be surprised if he gets traded to somebody and he ends up putting up 5 sacks in the back half of the year. That would not be a surprise to me at all. The other name here is Bradley Chubb, who is under team control next year. There's no real guaranteed money on his contract either. Has more sacks than Jaelan Phillips. The pressure rate's a little bit lower. He's coming off an injury as well last year. I am curious to see which one of these guys the Dolphins move, because they're not going to keep both of them long-term and have Chop Robinson. I think they need to play more anyway. Chubb has team control, but it's expensive team control. Kind of like how Kenny Clark has team control, but it's expensive next year. I'm curious how this one ends up playing out. Of these two, who would you rather the Dolphins get? JP for Jaelan Phillips, BC for Bradley Chubb. I don't really think Cam Jordan is a fit for you. Don't know if he wants out of New Orleans. I think he just kind of wants to retire there. Carl Granderson Jr. is a name worth mentioning here. Of note for Granderson, started the year very hot, has very much slowed down. 4.5 sacks. The pressure rate's not very good either. I will also make note, when you're stuck on a bad team that's losing a bunch of games, there are differences in quality of your pass rush snaps. Like sometimes, if you're facing 2nd and 3 and you're thinking it's a run, they did play action. Well, it's a pass rush snap for you, but did you have any real chance of getting a pressure? So like that type of stuff is worth mentioning as well. That's why sometimes you see the bad teams have a lower pressure rate because they're not in good pass rush scenarios. Next up is Arnold Ebiketie, the Falcons defensive end, as we move into the bargain bins and blowout section. Falling out of favor in Atlanta because they spent 2 first-round picks on edges. He had 6 sacks back in 2023 and 2024. Wouldn't be shocked if he gets moved. He's also a rental, and I do, like if it's a day 3 pick, I'm never going to be upset about trading away a day 3 pick. Worst case is, oh no, I burned a 6th-round pick instead of drafting someone who was probably going to have a Jalen Brooks-esque impact. Oh no, it doesn't really, or Eric Scott impact. It doesn't really bother me that much, but I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, now we're good because you spent a day 3 pick for a cheap guy. Arden Key maybe could have been in the second category as well. I think he and the other Titans player we'll get to here in a little bit are worth mentioning in this category. Key has been a productive player over the course of his career, but he's always kind of been the 6-sack guy. He's never really been the, I'm going to get you 8 sacks, 9 sacks. I had mentioned him a lot for the Niners on our NFL Daily Show because there's familiarity there. They need pass rush help. Still think it could make sense in the end, by the way. I think he's available. How much is that moving the needle for you? Outside of we're not playing Sam Williams anymore. Draymond Jones, who has had a really weird career with how he's been deployed. He's playing more edge for a guy that I was convinced was a 3 technique coming out of the NFL, or coming out of Ohio State, has gotten going a little bit as of late with several sacks in back-to-back games, kind of looking more like an impact piece. I think both those guys are exceedingly available in Tennessee. Kingsley Enagbare has been mentioned by ESPN several times. It would be kind of funny that you're like, yeah, the guy the Packers don't need anymore as their 4th edge. Falling out of favor, could be available. The common trend here is, did these guys really move the needle in the way that you need them to move the needle? I'm not so sure. A defensive tackle. And you'll make note, in general, by the way, I haven't mentioned that many defensive tackles. You're going to bring back Perion Winfrey. He's been designated to return from IR. I don't know how the numbers game works out there, which kind of makes me think that the likely outcome here is the Cowboys are looking more at defensive end. But if they want to look for a defensive tackle, I don't think the Browns are going to trade away Cowboys legend Malik Harris, funnily enough. But I do think that somebody in the vein of a backup defense tackle like Shelby Harris actually could start to make some sense for the Cowboys if they wanted to go get ADT. Likely wouldn't be very expensive. So what position do you think the Cowboys are more likely to add? Type DT for defensive tackle, obviously, or DE for defensive end. Next up is Matthew Judon, the Dolphins edge. It feels like if you follow the Saints stuff, they're like, yeah, what about Brandon Cooks? I'm like, no one wants Brandon Cooks. I don't think anybody really wants Matthew Judon either. He was unsigned for so long, hasn't been crazy productive this year. He's got 0 sacks. I don't think anybody wants him. Now, Calais Campbell back in Arizona. The Cardinals might be bad. I assume this trade is expected to happen, assuming the Cowboys win. Otherwise, maybe they reevaluate there. Campbell is starting to finally see signs of decline. Something tells me if he wanted out, he would go to a more obvious contender. Another DT, Sebastian Joseph Day, I do think would be available in Tennessee. I've always liked it. I think he's a solid player, solid role guy. Tyree Wilson, I think, is the more gettable Raiders trade target. I almost put Malcolm Kuntz on here. He's got 2 sacks this year for the Raiders. Big frame guy, 6'6", 275, has never lived up, unfortunately, to expectations in Vegas. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka from the Browns is kind of like their 4th edge, which would make him available, former first-round pick. But, again, a lot of these guys, it's kind of like that doesn't really move the needle for me, which is why if they're looking at edge or DT, maybe they aim a little bit higher.